Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really powerful, evidence-based way to build a classroom that's supportive and effective for every single student. We're going to break down how we can move from just managing behavior to actually teaching and supporting our students so they can succeed.
So, picture this. Mrs. Smith announces it's time for recess, and boom, the classroom just erupts. You've got kids rushing the door, some pushing, lots of noise. One student, who's already kind of on edge, just has a complete meltdown. And now Mrs. Smith is stuck managing a crisis instead of what should have been a simple, everyday transition. This isn't really a failure of the teacher or the students. It's a sign that the system itself needs a little help. And that brings us to this really fundamental shift in thinking. Instead of constantly reacting to problems, always putting out fires with punishment, we can build a system that helps prevent them from ever starting. It's this move from being reactive to being proactive. And that's the absolute core of what we call positive behavior support, or PBS. It's all about teaching, not just telling. Now, what's so critical to get here is that PBS is a proven, evidence-based practice, and it goes way deeper than just the surface-level behavior. It's built on this core belief that all behavior is a form of communication. We can't really solve a problem until we understand the why behind it. It's a complete shift from asking, how do I stop this, to asking, what is this student trying to tell me, and how can I help them?
Okay, let's get into it. Here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with that whole proactive approach, then we'll walk through the three-tiered system of support, check out some practical tools, and then really dig into understanding behavior with something called the FBA and creating a plan with the BIP. First up, let's talk about these three tiers. The whole PBS framework is kind of built like a pyramid. It gives the most support at the very bottom for everybody, and then it offers more targeted, more intense support for the students who need it as you move up to the top. And yeah, this slide shows that structure perfectly. Tier 1 is the foundation. It's the clear rules and routines that work for, about 80% of all students. For the kids who need a little extra, there's Tier 2, which might be something like small group lessons on social skills. And then for a small handful of students with the biggest challenges, you have Tier 3. That's where you'll see those really intensive, individualized supports, like a formal behavior intervention plan. So, with that framework in mind, let's talk about some actual tools for the classroom. And these aren't some complicated theories. They're just foundational teaching strategies that help create a positive vibe and can stop a lot of problems before they even start. It really starts with modeling. We can't just expect students to know how to act if we don't show them what it looks like. Sometimes it's explicit, like saying, okay, everyone, watch how I ask for help, and then you do it. But it can also be implicit and just as powerful, like when a teacher shows how to disagree with someone's idea respectfully during a class discussion. The thing is, we're always modeling, whether we realize it or not. Okay, this slide is a big one because this is a concept that gets a lot of people confused: reinforcement. Both positive and negative reinforcement have the same goal: to increase the behavior. Positive reinforcement is easy. You add something good, like praise. But negative reinforcement, that's the tricky one. It removes something bad. So, for example, a student finishes their work on time to avoid the thing they don't like, having to stay in during recess. See? It's not punishment, it's motivation by taking something away. These strategies right here, this is the heart and soul of a proactive Tier 1 classroom. This is exactly where Mrs. Smith's transition to recess went off the rails. If she had a consistent practice routine for lining up, that whole chaotic scene could have been avoided. Clear expectations, smooth transitions, and a focus on catching kids being good, these aren't extras. They are absolutely essential. But what about when those awesome universal strategies just aren't enough for a particular student? What happens when a student keeps struggling? A lot, even in a really positive classroom? Well, that's our cue to dig a little deeper. This is where we stop looking at just the what and we start investigating the why. We use this incredibly powerful problem-solving process called a functional behavior assessment, or FBA. It's basically a systematic way to figure out the purpose, or the function, that a specific behavior is serving for that student. The FBA process pretty much turns us into detectives. First, we just describe the behavior with facts, no judgments. So instead of saying Juan is defiant, we say Juan talks back to the teacher when he's asked to start his independent work. Then we analyze the context. What's happening right before and right after? And finally, based on all those clues, we come up with a hypothesis. Is Juan trying to get out of doing work that's too hard, or is he trying to look cool for his friends? Because the answer to that question changes everything.
And here's a huge distinction the FBA helps us figure out. Is this a skill deficit or a performance deficit? In other words, is this a can't-do problem or a won't-do problem? A student who literally doesn't know how to ask for help needs to be taught that skill. But a student who knows how but gets too frustrated to use the skill needs a totally different kind of support. Getting this right is the key to an intervention that actually works.
And that brings us to our final piece, putting it all into an action plan. Once our detective work from the FBA is done and we have a solid hypothesis, we can stop guessing and start creating a targeted, supportive plan. This plan is called a Behavior Intervention Plan, or BIP. And let's be crystal clear, a BIP is a teaching plan, not a punishment plan. The goal isn't to control the student. The goal is to teach them a better, more appropriate replacement behavior that meets the exact same need the problem behavior was trying to meet. What this shows is that a BIP is a serious, thoughtful document. It's not just a couple of ideas scribbled down. It clearly spells out the behavior, the strategies we'll use, the goals, and, this is critical, how we're going to measure progress and share that information. It just makes sure everyone on that student's team is on the same page and working from the same playbook.
This quote just nails the whole philosophy. We don't try to change the student's need, we change how they get that need met. So, if a student is talking out to get attention from their friends, we don't tell them to stop wanting friends. Instead, we teach them positive ways to get that attention, like by sharing or giving a compliment. We literally replace the negative behavior with a positive one that gets them the same result.
And that really brings us to the biggest takeaway here. When you put all these pieces together, the proactive Tier 1 stuff, the deep dive of the FBA, and the supportive teaching plan of the BIP, you realize that great behavior management isn't some separate, scary thing. It's just good, responsive, smart teaching. It's about building skills and giving support where it's needed.
So as we wrap up, I'll just leave you with this question to think about. Maybe it's explicitly modeling a social skill, or maybe it's just tweaking a transition routine, or maybe it's just making a point to praise positive actions more often. What's one small, proactive step you can take to build an even better system for your students tomorrow?